Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. I'm Chris Muntz, I'm the host, and today's episode is a special one. I have a real-life choral celebrity on the show today, Paul Smith, the founder, one of the founders, I should say, and the current CEO of the VOCES8 vocal ensemble that I'm sure you are all big fans of, as well as the VOCES8 Foundation, which is the music education wing of the VOCES8 organization. And Paul was in Kansas City this last weekend, and while he was here, we were able to connect a couple of times and make a recording of an episode and a conversation that I think you will really enjoy. We go all the way from what it's like to be a chorister at Westminster Abbey, where Paul grew up and learned to sing, what essentially made becoming a founder and singer in VOCES8 inevitable with the kind of upbringing and music education that he had. And we go into comparing his music education to the average music education of a British student. He works a lot alongside with American kids as well, and with the VOCES8 Foundation, and he gives us observations of what he sees in the American system, some pros and cons. And we even get into the nerdiest of the nerdy and talking about the method of vocal production for the typical British professional choral singer versus what we think of in the US as the ideal choral tone and choral sound. So we get quite into the nuts and bolts, as well as just the philosophy of performing as part of your music portfolio, but also being a teacher, and how those two things really are not that different from each other. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think you will as well. So we'll get into that in just a little bit, but first, a funny story. The interview that you are about to hear is actually our take two of the interview, because this is where I just reveal a little bit of behind the scenes for you today. I met in person with Paul. I'm going to play a little clip of the surviving portion of that interview where we did a whole podcast in person at William Jewell College. My good friend Tony Maglione let us use his office. I even feel like a total jerk because I didn't know that he was having a concert on campus while we were doing this podcast in his office, and I missed the concert, which I might have been able to justify, all to say then to discover later when I stood up and walked out of the room, something had gone wrong and I lost all of the audio. I was recording on two devices for that interview. They both malfunctioned for unrelated reasons. It was just a really bizarre twist of events, and I was really embarrassed, and I wrote Paul right afterwards. He had already left. By the way, Ubered to me 30 minutes each way to do this hangout. He hung out with me, and I showed him around a choir event I was at, and then we do the interview, and then it's gone. And I was just, I've never been more mortified. And so I messaged him and I said, I think it's all gone and I don't know what to say. I'm just super embarrassed. I understand if you can't give me any more time because you've already given me 4 hours. I totally understand. But if you could, I would be so over the moon to try to re-record this. So the next morning in where he's staying in Kansas City, he woke up, got some work done. We reconnected through the typical process that I do for this show, which is to record remotely, even though he was just down the street. And we were able to redo the interview. And in a lot of ways, it was better the second time because we'd had some practice. And so I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So I'll start out by playing a little bit of a clip from what survives again of that first attempt, just because it's funny to know the background story. And then I'll go on without much further ado into the full interview. Okay, welcome, Paul Smith.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for being on the Choralosophy Podcast. And for those of you who might be watching on the YouTube channel, welcome to my friend Tony Maglione's office. Very nice of him to share his space as we were just watching kids sing around the Kansas City area, and I was able to pull Paul, drag him across from his travels through the country. So I'm excited to get a chance to pull an hour out and chat with you.
It's great.
Yeah,
well, it's great right now. Who knows how it's going to turn out an hour from now? You'll be totally fed up with me. But
I'll edit out all the embarrassing parts.
That's good.
Well, first, let's just start out by letting you share a little bit about why you're here. For those of you who don't know, Paul, is your title now CEO of VOCES8?
Yeah, it sounds pretty serious, doesn't it?
Yes, the Chief Executive Officer.
Yeah, wow, how about that?
Of VOCES8, formerly a singer in the group and one of the founders. So what is life like for you now that you're not singing in the group?
Honestly, it's wonderful. I absolutely loved the 11 or so years that I had singing in the group. But when we started VOCES8, we set up the VOCES8 Foundation at the same time. So for the whole time I was singing in the group, I was also running the foundation. And frankly, things have grown to a place we never thought they would get to, and that's very exciting. But it just meant, I suppose, 11 years in, I wanted to be able to still enjoy my life, and the way I thought I could do that best, whilst also doing what I'm best at, was to step out of the group, stop singing, and make sure I was really leading on the education side of what we do. And so I love my life now. I get to compose a bit, I get to lead lots of great choirs all over the place, and about half of my life I'm with VOCES8, some of the rest of the time I'm with our other group, Apollo 5, and some of the time I'm by myself. But I think I spend more time on the road now without the group than when I was in it. But I feel there's a nice balance, and yeah, it's great to be back in America. We're spending something like 2.5 months of every year now out in the US, touring all over, and singing and working with amazing choirs everywhere we go. So it's a nice job.
The group has a lot of fans here. That does not surprise me at all. When we met today, when you got here, you mentioned that there were a couple days on the group's tour when you weren't needed. What does that mean? And when you are needed, what does that mean you're needed to do?
That's a good question. I think if you ask the group, they might say something different. But the way we tend to work our schedule, sometimes we turn up to do a concert, and it's just a concert. But wherever we go, we try to build in some form of interaction with the local community, whether that's a workshop for local schools, whether that's bringing amateurs to come and work with us, whether it's both of those things. So often on this tour, for example, I either arrive a little bit ahead of the group and do some workshops to prepare the local choirs, or I turn up with the group and I kind of facilitate the sessions and I host things, and then I get to sit down in the concert and actually watch this great music making happening, which is kind of a nice job to have. Really.
Mm-hmm. So would it be fair to say then, in part of your role now as kind of being the administrator of VOCES8, that you're also kind of the educational outreach coordinator? Do you wear both hats?
I wear a few different hats, and I'd say that's it. We're very lucky now. What started as this kind of group of friends singing together has now turned into a foundation where we employ quite a big team. So we've got probably 25 people on staff if you include the singers of both groups and all of our admin, and then we've got agencies who are working with us all around the world. So one of my jobs is just to coordinate all of that chaos and channel it into a program for our organisation that the singers can handle, because it's a lot of work.
I just threw a little clip there of Paul's composition, Nunc Dimittis, that he will tell us about later in the episode. I just wanted to give you a little taste of that. It's just stunning, and VOCES8 has a recording, so check that out. To thank the sponsors of this episode, first wanted to give a shout out to the process I'm undergoing right now in my classroom today. In fact, in between getting this chat with Paul in, I was evaluating my kids on Sight Reading Factory one at a time in a practice room. As I said in a few episodes ago, it's pre-test time right now for me at my school, which means each kid comes in one at a time. I set them to a level that I think is pretty typical for their grade level, but if they breeze through it and it's way too easy, I bump them up a level for their final in December. If they really struggle, then I bump them down a level. The idea being that by December, we want them, no matter what level they're singing at right now, to feel fluent in the exercise. And as I mentioned in that episode, they have the opportunity of getting an A on the test, whether they are reading a level 5 on Sight Reading Factory or reading a level 1. What matters is their independence and their fluency, and it allows them to feel successful no matter what level they're reading at, and I think that's really important for their confidence. So that's something you can get on Sight Reading Factory, as well as work for your whole class with multi-part exercises that are customizable to the level of your kids, which is why I think it's so special of a program. So you can go to sightreadingfactory.com, enter Choralosophy at checkout, get 10% off, and that's off of your individual teacher membership, as well as all the memberships that you might get for your students, though they can practice this stuff unlimited amounts of times at home. In addition to Sight Reading Factory, you can get sheet music online through a couple of awesome sources that are affiliated with this show. First, Graphite Publishing is a online publisher that has access to a ton of great composers, some of the top in the field right now: Eric Barnum, Jocelyn Hagan, Tim Takash, Joshua Shank, many, many more. You need to check out this website if it's not one of your first 2 or 3 clicks when you're looking for repertoire for your choirs. Plus, you can use that promo code Choralosophy at checkout and get 10% off there as well. In addition, you have RyanMain.com, who's also throwing his weight behind this show, and I'd love for you to show your appreciation by checking out his catalog. Now, of course, that website, you're going to have a target in mind, which is mostly his music. He does have some music by a few other composers on his website, but it's mostly his stuff, so it's self-published. You're really supporting the grassroots of the choral world when you buy Ryan's music, but it's also really good stuff, especially if you've got the specific need that I've always had when I use Ryan stuff. I've got a group, they're maybe not my most advanced group, but they need something that will make them sound like $1,000,000 because it's intricate and it's got interesting elements, but it's accessible to kids that have not been singing for a whole lot of time. And so something that they can jump right into, sink their teeth into. And Ryan's music goes from all of that up to the advanced, and he also does a site license where if you type in, if you buy the license, you get to print and download as many of those as you'd like forever, and you own that PDF. So that's a really cool thing. So check out all 3 of those great online businesses. Throw them your support. Don't forget to use Choralosophy at checkout. Up next, Paul Smith of VOCES8. All right, I am here with Paul Smith, who is the CEO and one of the founders of VOCES8. And I'm excited to have a conversation today about how the worlds of choral performance and music education intersect. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
It's very nice to be here, and I'm super excited about this conversation as well.
Good. Well, one of the things that I think the choir world is already familiar with is VOCES8 as a performing ensemble. So one of the things I wanted to chat with Paul about is their dual role as music educators. Of course, those of you who listen to this show on a regular basis know that is kind of the focus of this show is music education, but we are very choral art form friendly on the Choralosophy podcast as well. So I'm going to have all kinds of questions for you, Paul, but let's start with the origin story of Paul, how little Paul grew up to be big Paul, where VOCES8 was inevitability. How did you start with your choral love and passion?
Well, my origin story, I do love that term because I'm a big Marvel fan. Well, and DC is also okay. I should be fair to them. So my beginnings, actually, I was very lucky. I was a chorister at Westminster Abbey, and so was my brother Barney, and we're the 2 co-founders of the group. We set the group up in 2005 with a bunch of friends. Most of us had met at the Royal Schools of Church Music, the RSCM, singing in one of their youth choirs. But actually, really, I think our journey began when we were 8 or 9 years old, and we had this incredible opportunity to sing at Westminster Abbey for something like 4 hours every day. You get a kind of unique training opportunity, which really sets you up for a career in vocal music.
So a question then about that for you when you were young and learning to read music for the first time, because of course I talk a lot about on this show teaching literacy. But of course, in the context of the American school systems, we teach it oftentimes from scratch to 13 or 14-year-olds who have never read before. So when you were an 8 or 9-year-old being thrown into singing for 4 hours a day, what do you remember about the way you were taught to read?
That's a good question. I'm sure how I remember it now is probably not how it was at the time, but I certainly know there was a massive emphasis on sight singing. And when we were set up in our choir formation in the choir school, they would tend to put the senior boys next to the junior boys. So there'd be this element of you're always working with sheet music, but there's always an older kid, maybe 2 years above you, who's there guiding you, who's more experienced. So you end up picking up sight singing in two ways really, as partly through the oral process of just learning next to a senior boy, but also just the relentless pace of which you're working through music. I mean, we're putting together a even song every day. We're singing something like 8 services a week at Westminster Abbey. So it was a lot of music being learned very fast and to a very high level. So to be immersed in that kind of environment from a young age, especially age 8, 9, 10, we're just like sponges. We're picking up so much so fast. To have that opportunity, I think, really set us on the right path that we've got to today. And it's a very lucky thing to be able to become a chorister in one of the fine cathedrals across the UK. We have this wonderful tradition which still exists, but it's under threat a little bit, not because of the quality of opportunity, but more increasingly just the number of students who are applying to be a chorister is dwindling. And one of our missions, I suppose, is to keep talking to people about how incredible this opportunity is and how it's basically free. It was a scholarship that you get to go to Westminster Abbey, and then from there I got a scholarship to go to Bedford. And if I hadn't had those opportunities financially, I wouldn't have been able to go to those kind of schools. So it was really a life-defining moment.
It sounds like an amazing experience, and I know then, just so I can summarize what you just walked us through, would you say it's fair to say that you learned to read music by immersion?
In part,
and not
yeah.
So do you remember in your early years, did they sit down and tutor you on the music theory aspect? Did you have to go through, here's what a quarter note looks like, here's what a half note looks like, and all of that?
Yeah, and we don't call it quarter notes, of course, but
of course, yes, of
our
course.
crotchets and quavers and minims
and
yeah.
semi-quavers and
all of the joys. Yeah,
yeah.
I think we use the ABRSM sort of examination process. I don't know. Do you have the same over here? ABRSM?
No.
No. So we have grade 1 to 8 of every instrument, and by the time you get to grade 8, you're kind of now a competent player, and then after that, you would go on to sort of diploma levels and more advanced stuff, which would kind of move you into a professional realm. And the one thing that you have to have in terms of theory, and we were worked into this immediately alongside that immersive process, is to get to grade 5 theory level. And you can't actually take exams in the other instruments until you've above grade 5, until you've passed your grade 5 theory. So it becomes a requirement. So that's the kind of one of the things that they put us through. And that's something that normally, I think, if you weren't going through this extreme process, you'd do in your teenage years. But for us, it was something that was expected of us by kind of the time we were 10, 11, really. So there was definitely theory, a lot of theory alongside the immersion, but it's pretty all encompassing.
So we'll call it then choir boot camp.
You like that.
You were in choir boot camp and kind of learning. Of course, it's the art. The choral art was probably at the center of your education, and you were learning other things, and you had history class and mathematics and other types of things built in, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, if you're a chorister at Westminster Abbey, there's only 36 students in the whole school, and all of those sing in the choir. You live on site, and certainly when I was there, this is roughly the schedule. I don't suppose it's changed much. And they'd get you up at sort of 6:30, 6:45 every day. You'd have breakfast, you'd do an instrumental practice straight away, then you'd go and sing for an hour, then you'd come back and start lessons, then you'd probably go into the Abbey to sing something for the tourists coming around. Then you'd have a few more lessons, and so you're constantly singing and playing instruments is always part of the day. And you sort of get to the end of your working day around 7:30, 20 minutes, and then as the youngest kid, you're in bed by 8, and then you wake up the next day and start again. Wow. So it's quite severe. Yeah, it was fun though, great fun.
So choir boot camp and Harry Potter had a baby,
yes.
and that was your childhood.
Pretty much. And we did get to wear very cool capes walking around Westminster Abbey in the cloisters every day. It really felt a little bit like Harry Potter. But of course, Harry Potter didn't exist when I was a chorister. That's how old I am. Right. So I was like pre-Harry Potter.
But Harry Potter before it was cool. I love it.
Exactly.
So I get a picture now of what the education was like in terms of preparing you for VOCES8 eventually. That makes sense that you would develop that skill set through that immersion process. So tell us a little bit about the origin story of the group. What's some behind the scenes that maybe we wouldn't be able to Google?
That's a good question. I mean, you could probably find any number of origin stories now about VOCES8. I'm not sure how many of them are true. What I can tell you is that we started in 2005, and really we started just as a group of friends who used to like singing together. So me and my brother used to organize get-togethers and parties and sleepovers, and we'd sing for fun, and then we put on a concert. And we entered a competition in Italy in 2005 in Gorizia, just because it was a free trip to Italy, pretty much. And when we got there, we realized it was more serious than we had anticipated. So we did some practice, and actually we'd gone with a chamber choir of 20 singers, something like that. Oh. And there was one category that was for vocal jazz. So we thought, okay, well, let's just do that with 8 singers, and we learned our songs, and on we went, and we won the competition. And that was a surprise. That was, I think, one of those big moments in life that you never plan for, and it just changes the course of what's going to happen to you for the rest of your life. And so we won this competition, then we won another one the next year, and suddenly we decided, okay, let's see where we can take this. And that original group, really, I think without their dedication over the first 4, 5, 6 years, when we basically gave up our jobs, we spent all our time trying to make VOCES8 a success. We didn't earn really any money at the time. It was a lot of hard work, and anyone thinking of starting a vocal ensemble, I would emphasize that it's not just going to fall into your lap. It's something that we work at as hard as we can, and we still do, frankly. Mm-hmm. But with those first 4 or 5 years, we needed a group of people who were totally committed, and we were lucky to get that. And we worked hard, and here we are, celebrating our 15th season now. It's crazy that we'd never imagined it would grow as far as it has. And you talk about this podcast being something that's not just music, but music education focused. And when we set up VOCES8 properly, so 2005, 2006, for us, that was also something we wanted to really place at the heart of what we do. So we didn't just want to be a vocal ensemble that toured the world. We wanted to be something bigger than that in terms of the world of music education, and trying to establish a foundation from the very get-go that was not just going to be lip service to performance, but actually was going to start making a real difference. And we've been driving at that idea alongside our performance ever since we started. So now we have a foundation center. We run a church right next to St. Paul's Cathedral, which is called the VOCES8 Center. We've set up a second ensemble called Apollo 5, which is also, like us, a professional vocal ensemble touring internationally, but doing great work in the education sphere. We have a scholars program here in America. We've also got a scholars program for young professionals in the UK. And then we have a course that we're running at Cambridge University. We're working in lots of universities around the US. But then we also filter all the way through the system and work with students of every age, every ability level, right down to kindergarten, Key Stage 1, and going into schools often where there's no music happening. For us, and for me in particular, that's one of the most important things that we need to be doing, trying to skill up teachers and schools that don't have a music program to speak of, so that they can have something that's offering an opportunity for students to learn about music, which, we're here because we had the best opportunities, and we feel it's our responsibility to be offering the same back. So I think we worked with about 40,000 students last year across the world, and probably I think more than 10,000 of those were here in America. So we're very committed to our work in the US, and we've just set up a 501c3 out here as well now to really further that work. And we're focused on trying to offer support in as many varied ways as possible, because frankly, I don't know what you think of music education in the US at the moment, but I'm not wholly optimistic about how things are going over in the UK, and I suspect that there are some similar trends over here too.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, that touches on something I was going to ask you about anyway, which is that disparity, because I do want to talk about the US system as well, but tell us a little bit about how you would quantify the disparity between the hyper elite level choir boot camp Harry Potter world that you grew up in, and what the typical British child receives in terms of music education.
Yeah, it's a very wide gap, if we're being honest. And it's not to say that there aren't great state schools, which I think, so you call state schools public schools.
Yep.
And we call state schools, and then we call independent private schools, they can be called public schools, just to really confuse it. So in our state schools, there are some fantastic state schools doing great work, but there are also many pockets across the UK where there is really very little provision for music. Certainly at primary, at junior level, there are so many schools that don't have a music specialist anymore, and the burden of teaching music will be put onto someone who feels really low in confidence in their capability to deliver any sort of music program. And then to squeeze things further, music will not be given the priority I believe it should be given in the school life, and there will be no funding invested in music in the school. So you end up with this kind of horrible circle of problems which block music learning in all these different ways. And that's a challenge that we're trying to face. And there are lots of people who are trying to find solutions. I don't feel like we're alone in the fight, but it's certainly the case that arts institutions are having to step up and do more. There's music hubs who are sort of government-funded organisations across the UK who have a responsibility to be supporting music in each school area. Some of them are doing great work, and some of them, frankly, are not. And again, it's totally hit or miss. It's by chance. So we're looking at ways to tackle that problem. One of the things we've done for the last 5 or 6 years is actually try provide resources and supports in a number of different ways. So I wrote a book back in 2013 called the VOCES8 Method, and this is designed as a sort of first step into musical teaching for teachers who are not confident. So actually the whole book is notated without written musical notation. There's loads of videos that you can tap into, and it's ideally designed so that teachers who are terrified of singing can still find a way to use their voice and to get music happening in their classroom without that initial fear of, oh my God, I've got to sing, which, as you know, can be a block for a number of people. Even us pros get a little bit nervous, don't we, about using our voice and what people might say. So there was a pile of research that was done by Susan Hallam. Professor Hallam was from the Institute of Education in London, and she wrote a paper called "The Power of Music." And you should definitely link that into this topic if you can, because it's awesome. And what it did was it pulled out all of the research that's been done around the world, including a major study in the US actually, which looked at transfer. So how music making activities can link to a specific development in other academic areas. So how can we tie something rhythmic to numeracy? How can we tie something with singing and with vowels and consonants and pattern building into understanding of literacy, linguistics, and that kind of language structure? So I kind of delved into that research, and I pulled out of it a bunch of ideas. And with those ideas, I then kind of thought back through all the warm-ups that I've been doing for the last 25 years in different choirs, and then thought about ways to simplify it to the most simple level possible, and then tap into an element of world music, I suppose, so that we could start teaching by stealth. So the method starts with some very simple beatboxing and movements. So we're making sounds, we're not singing. Then we start learning clapping patterns and begin to learn some African rhythms, that kind of stuff. Then we think about the pentatonic scale. Then we think about solfege. And so slowly across the 8 chapters of the book, the students get taken on a journey without really realizing it and never really being told beforehand that they're going to start learning some elements which I would say are kind of useful starting points for understanding a world of music. And all of it can be done by a teacher who's not a music specialist without using instruments. And even if you spend 5 or 10 minutes a day doing this, we've found that the impact on the students can be really positive. And actually some of the schools that have been taking it on, it's been amazing to see how it's kind of jumped and now lives in its own way. It's being used in maybe 7, 8, 9,000 schools now, which is very exciting. And it's been translated into 4 different languages. And I keep getting stories back of how people are using it in a way I've never intended. So one teacher actually taught all the class teachers in her school. Each class became responsible for one chapter of the book. And then they would come together in their assemblies, and suddenly they'd all have something different, which would combine to make this kind of multi-layered piece of music. And the whole idea of the method is that it gets layer building happening as quickly as possible. So we're not just learning a melody line, but we're thinking about depth in music, which I think is a really important skill to be developing from the get-go.
So it's almost as if you are building blocks that a student would need later if they were to do to even have a concept of how to do the more advanced music that a lot of choral ensembles do if they've got no starting place. Is that
Exactly.
is that kind of what you're
Basically,
thinking?
yeah, pretty much. I mean, so if you came into a session where we're running the method activities, you might think you were in a choir warm up, but
Mm,
it's very kinesthetic. We design it so you participate. There's demonstration, but there's no explanation till afterwards. So it's very, very simple to just copy and respond to, and then it gets unpicked at a later date. But as you say, it ties into skills that you and I would think were important for a student to be learning when it comes to then singing in a choir at a later date. And actually, you end up with lots of different moving parts, lots of different layers, and these skills around listening and pattern building and sort of interpreting layers. And then also on top of that, we throw in massive opportunities for creativity, which I think are really important to have in a musical classroom, not just learning how to sing a note, but really to be able to think and create and have fun. That's the most
yeah.
important thing, right? If we're having fun, we're learning. So it's kind of based around that, and it's designed so that any teacher can pick it up. And then
Yeah, it sounds like a great tool.
it's fun. It's been amazing to see what happens. And if you are a good choir teacher, you'll watch the kind of activities and you will instantly recognize where they've come from, and you'll see, oh, that's a bit of beatboxing. Oh, I can see how that pattern game is going to link to something I would do with my choir. So
Uh-huh.
we use it in choir settings, but at the same time, it can be used in any classroom. And I think as musicians, you and I would say that music has value in and of itself and should be taught in school. But if I'm trying to convince a school that maybe doesn't think like that, I can point to the transfer, to the improvements and opportunities for development in other academic subjects and say, look, this isn't going to cost you anything. I can skill up your teachers to do it easily. And you've got a potential here for school improvement across the areas that you're going to get judged on. And
Hmm.
if you can persuade a senior management team that that's a positive thing, then they will begin to understand, even without really maybe accepting it at first, that music can have a place at the heart of the school. And I think for me, that's so essential. If you put music and the creative arts at the center of a community, it flourishes and it's nourishing and joyful and better in terms of how the students are acting, how they feel. And what you tend to then see is a happier student works better and they're doing things that musically are improving other areas as well. Suddenly,
Right.
everything is better and it doesn't have to cost anything, really. I mean, obviously, it's lovely when you go to a school which has great resources and is doing mind-bogglingly wonderful things.
Yeah.
But in the places that aren't able to do that, there is still a way, and yeah, I think it's our job to help offer those kind of resources and
Yeah,
those
that
solutions.
sounds great. I think that'd be a tool that, like you said, an experienced director could get something out of and add to their repertoire, but then also could take somebody from scratch, and that sounds awesome. But what I'd like to do next is kick it across the pond, and because you're in the U.S. now, you're on tour.
Yeah.
You're doing some not only performances, but you're doing some of these educational kind of workshops, clinics, and that kind of thing along the way. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, and you don't have to worry about hurting anyone's feelings on this podcast. What things that you notice, pros and cons, when you work with American singers, that is that is a distinction between young singers that are learning to sing in the UK. What are some just weird, picky details that you notice along the way?
Okay, wow, that's a big question.
Uh
First thing
huh.
to say, first thing to say is that I am always thrilled by the level of enthusiasm I see for choral singing in choir school. And you and I have been talking, and I know you've got a great program of choir in your school. And working with you yesterday, I got to see some other schools with really awesome, enthusiastic students being led through great music by teachers who are passionate about what they do. And so I do think there's like in the UK, many pockets where great things are happening. And just in the last couple of weeks, we've been working in schools across the country who are doing wonderful things. And for us, we say our job in that setting is to come to provide some splashes of inspiration and maybe some resources that we can leave behind. But actually, when we visit, we do get this sense that, this is good stuff that needs to happen is happening here. And that's very exciting. It's interesting for me to watch the American system and how differently. For example, you might use solfege, which is much more embedded over here than it is in the UK. Thing in one of our workshops yesterday, and they were doing the exercise to solfege, and I turned to you and I said, I would find that really hard, whereas I could just pick up the music and I'd like to use the words of the music, not solfege. This idea to me that I have to fit other syllables to the text of a song is tricky for me. It's not how my brain works.
Right.
But as you then replied, well, that's how we learn over here, and that's a viable way of getting these students singing polyphony, which they were doing at the time. So it's really nice to see those kind of breakdowns.
Well, and here's how I would explain that to a Brit who learned, essentially you were learning to read at an age where your brain was still open to new languages. It's the same time of life where you might acquire a second language or a third language, and so you look at a piece of music, I'm guessing at your age now, and you can hear it happening in your head, and the access to singing it is not a super challenging thing. Whereas we get kids oftentimes who at age 14, that learning kind of part of their brain is shut off, and so we have to have some kind of way to attach a sound to their ear that's going to be true every time they pick up a piece of music, whereas the words will change, in every song. And so the solfege for us oftentimes I always tell our kids that it's the equivalent of an instrumentalist pushing a button and getting the right note to come out. we don't have that in our voices, so the solfege, and we use the Kodai hand signs, and it creates a kinesthetic connection for them, and they can learn it in that way very, very quickly. Whereas if they were to start just singing the words right away, it would be a guess. Everything would be a guess. And so it's an interesting thing, and I agree, it is a very different system, partly because we don't get to start them really oftentimes at age 8 or at age 9. A lot of, I'd say, in the American side of things, the greatest disparities in music education happen at the young age. So most high schools, so this is your age 14 to 18-year-old kids, most high schools across the country have a choral program, but not most elementary schools, which is where we would put our 5 to 12-year-olds. And so some great children's choirs in the U.S. exist, and they start them really young. We had one when I was growing up that was a boys treble choir that was kind of the best singers from all the different elementary schools in our area. And so I did grow up with the opportunity to sing Palestrina at age 9. So I had that, but I was very rare, very, very rare. Whereas some elementary school choirs don't have a choir at all, some elementary schools don't have a choir at all. So that's where I see the disparity. Is at that younger level. And then so oftentimes we do teach our high school kids to read music from scratch.
From nothing. And actually, and in many ways, there are a lot of similarities, I would say, to the UK system in that way. I think the elementary, the junior level, primary school is where we have, again, that massive issue. I think something like in the UK in the last 7 years, we're down 55% on the number of music teachers being trained. So
wow.
This is a serious problem that is not just happening now, but which is not going to get better without some fairly drastic attempts to improve things. And actually, one of the places we're going to be visiting next week, we're off to San Francisco in the Bay Area, and we're working with a program out there called Music for Minors, which works with something I think like 75 schools in the Bay Area, elementary schools, and it is only through this arts organization, charity, that they're able to put music of any sort into these schools. So they're the music providers, and we're getting involved to go and support a little bit. I was out there for the first time last year, and we're going to be offering some training, I think, to some of their teachers as well, and thinking about ways they can improve their skill set. I think a lot of what we need to be doing is actually, of course, training the trainers, teaching the teachers of the future. Quite a lot of what our work looks at in the UK and here in the US is actually really exploring things with music ed students and with people who are studying music. And that's one interesting thing about the US. You guys have like music ed and music performance, and it kind of seems to be split. And in the UK, we just have like music, And I, for me, I find that's an interesting thing to explore, because I then come across people who maybe have wanted to be a professional performer and they've ended up as a music teacher, and they see that as failure because they didn't study, the right degree, and they didn't get to where they wanted to be. Whereas actually, for me, I love the idea that we all develop, certainly through our end of teenage years into early 20s, as the most rounded musicians possible, as performers and educators, as teaching artists. And then we find a role in our community, which could be teaching, which could be performing, which could be a mixture of the two. And that is not failure, that's success. And that's exciting. So that's one little slight difference, I'd say. In the UK, we don't differentiate quite so early in that sort of way.
Yeah, we talked about this yesterday, and I found that to be a really interesting observation because I had never thought of that before, and now that you mention it, I see it. I see that if you pay $100,000 for a degree in vocal performance, and 10 years later you're teaching high school choir, I can see even with your best effort to have a positive outlook on things, there would be a kind of a built-in, well, I guess I failed.
Yeah.
I failed to perform as my living, even though my degree says performance. And I don't think that would happen in every case. I think there are for example, I started out as a performance major when I went to college, mostly because at age 18, I had thought almost nothing about what I wanted to do for a living. And I had a scholarship to go and sing in school. And so I just did that. I hadn't thought, I was like, well, I can sing well and somebody's going to pay me money. So I'm going to go do that. And I don't know what I'm going to do after that, but I'm just going to start. And that was the depth of my thought process about it. And about 2 years into the process, my dad, who's not a music person at all, observed in his very frank businessman-like way, hey, I noticed that you're never practicing your opera music. You're always practicing your choir music. Why is that? And I went, I don't know. And then I thought more about that, and I said, it's because I hate opera. Why am I doing this? Whenever I was given a chance to spend some extra time on my schoolwork, I was gravitating towards my choral music. And I just didn't think of it in that way. And so after that conversation, I went and switched my major. But like you said, you have to switch. Like you have to then change your focus to music education and declare, and go through that whole process. So I think I kind of support what you're saying there, in the sense that I think it would be a great mentality shift for American universities to think of it that way.
And I mean, there are some American universities with fantastic music education programs, with fantastic voice programs. They're all out there doing great work. But for me, in the UK, we have basically an academic music degree if you go to a university, or you can go to a conservatoire or college, like Royal Academy or something, and that would be a performance-based music degree. But on the whole, it's music. And then when you further down the line, even if you have an idea in your head of where you'd like to go, it gives you a bit more flexibility, I suppose. And I think I was talking to you as well, and you said that in the US, if you did a vocal performance degree, then you wouldn't be qualified to teach after that. Is that correct?
In a public, or what you would call state school,
yeah,
in most places in the country, you wouldn't be qualified to teach. You would have to go back to school and get the certification to teach. So for the most part, if you get a degree in music education, part of that process includes going through the local state's accreditation board. To get, whereas a performance degree curriculum wouldn't take you through that process. So you could absolutely get a degree in performance and then eventually teach, but it would require some extra things on top of that. And so, I use the example of my wife, who's been teaching privately in her own studio for 17, 18 years, and has worked with high school age voices a dramatically large amount and has done a lot of choral performance, but she would be unqualified for my job. Even though she knows just as much as or more than I do about everything that I do every day.
Well done. Shame more. I think you need to get that critically accurate.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite. I agree. Anyways, yeah, it's very.
It's an interesting thing, and
As
so yeah, and I think that the psychological part of it that's important with that observation that you made too was that if we call even, I don't think we should change that we teach music education to kids that are music education focused, because I think, like you said, there are great programs doing great things in that way. But what if we just called them all music degrees?
Yeah, exactly.
And then when 10 years later, when you're doing a little bit of performing, like I do, that's kind of like my life is I perform a little bit and I teach a lot and I, do this podcast, and they're all music things. And so I can look at my career and say, I'm doing music for a living, and hey, that matches my degree. I did it. I win.
Exactly.
Rather than having swung and missed at some very specific target. I think I like that concept. So go ahead. No,
well, I was going to say actually that yes, my job is with VOCES8. My job is the VOCES8 Foundation, but actually I'm the same as you. I sing, I conduct, I compose, and I teach, and I actually have all of these different things that I do within my one job. And for me, that's what keeps it fresh. It's what I love. So it's nice to have a portfolio career, whether that's with one organization or whether it's with different places doing different things.
Right. Well, I want to go one nerd level deeper. Level down, so to speak, to the technical. I would be curious. I love talking to British people about what they see from a technical aspect when American choirs sing versus when British choirs sing. Everybody knows there is a different sound. How do you explain it?
I have to be careful not to massively offend people, don't I? But I'll try my best. I'm British, so I can normally get away with it if I just say something.
You offending people helps my ratings.
So okay, great. So as horrible as possible. Well, I mean, I think it's interesting, and this probably goes from the top to the bottom in terms of if you look at the main groups who are pros in the US right now, and then look at the people who are studying as teenagers. Naturally, they're aspiring to be like their idols, and I'm sure it's the same in the UK. We all have our favorites, don't we? And so once you find your favorite sounds, your favorite groups, then there's that flattery of imitation. So there is a certain probably sound that's being filtered from the top to the bottom. And I suppose I would sum it up very, very broadly, and of course I'm therefore going to miss the mark along the line because it's massively generic. But if you imagine that Americans are singing a lot, for me, and if you look at the main American composers being sung and compared that sound world to say what the British choirs have been brought up on and are singing most of, I would say it's more likely that the kind of Lauridsen and then on is sung more over here. And actually, if you look at where we've come from in the cathedrals, there'll be a lot of Renaissance music, and then we spin on from there. And those different types of music, to me, require different types of sound. The danger can be when you, as a good choir, gets stuck in one sound and don't start to think about the other sounds. So if like an American choir with something like a kind of breathiness to it, I'd say a British choir had much more bite and much more presence, much more core in the sound. And that's a massive sweeping generalization. But I think if you then look at how those sound worlds would get applied into those types of music, they'd be effective in different ways. And so in VOCES8, when we're thinking about the sounds that we make, if you hear us sing a Monteverdi madrigal, and the way we use the voice and allow each individual voice to open up and to really to be fully used, fully expressive, how we're controlling the vibrato, how much color we're letting into the sound, as opposed to when we're singing some of our softer kind of woofier, gentle sounds. And I think working with Decca for the last 7 years, we've been focused a lot on trying to find this kind of intimate, crystal, beautiful sound, which just sparkles, but is so close to the edges of the vocal folds that it's just shimmering. And then how much air we use and how much we allow the core and the presence in the voice to come out the vowels we use, these all have an impact. But I think if you're cutting to it, I think a nice way of looking at it is those interpretative styles of music, and maybe singing other styles could allow us to think into those sound worlds a bit more. Like if I'm going to sing a German romantic piece, I want a sound that's like that, I want to feel the German romanticism in it. Whereas if I'm singing a piece of William Byrd, I want a much clearer, more precise, but with shape to it. And then if I'm singing a piece by, well, we're doing some Jake Runestad, that kind of stuff at the moment, again, that's something different. So it's always trying to find a color that works with that. But I think in the UK, we're probably more stuck on the confident, strong, full voice singing, and we'd struggle to soften. And in America, I'd say you're probably too soft and struggle to really engage the full core.
Yeah, I agree with all of that analysis. I think one of the things that's going on, I'm actually preparing an episode on this coming up soon, not specifically about the international differences, but just about the physics of what's going on when you sing the way you described, which is to have some bite or core in the sound, versus the woofier, breathier tone that oftentimes American directors prefer. The British way of singing tends to be more overtone rich, and I've even got a cool software that I'm going to reveal on the show that shows what that whole spectrum of sound waves and overtones look like.
That's cool.
Versus the American choir, which tends to only utilize the fundamental and the first overtone, because the folds oftentimes are not all the way touching, and so the full resonance isn't there. It's a really interesting scientific thing. Yeah, and I think the maybe the British way of singing in a choir is also partially inspired, or I guess informed, by the smaller ensemble sizes. So like
I'd say for sure. I'd say smaller ensembles, but also the spaces that we would have been singing in.
Yes.
So we have all these cathedrals where a small number of people have to fill the space.
Yep.
And so there is that traditional British sound, which I think comes out of that, where American sound comes from a different place.
Yeah, we grow up performing in theaters.
Yeah.
That's and where oftentimes there's a microphone attached to the choir,
and
which
with probably a much bigger choir as well.
Yes, and with of course, like a bigger, even thinking about like an American professional choir that would be one of our top ones, like a Seraphic Fire, although oftentimes their singers use something closer to what a British singer would do in terms of vocal production. But it's a larger choir. It's going to be, where your Tallis scholars and the 16 and VOCES8, and those are quite a bit smaller. Each singer is responsible for more stuff, more sound. Which is something with my work in Contra, we chatted about this a little bit yesterday. I grew up listening to those British groups. That's where my ear got formed for choral music, and so I tend to gravitate towards that. And I want to get your feedback on one thing, because so I need you to translate this from British to American English.
Oh gosh,
are you ready to translate? So we had Contra had a review once in Music Web International. I told you about this yesterday, but I wanted to read from it because I want to hear what you think this means. So it says, another thing to say early on in the review is that I know singers and listeners in the UK who have a slight aversion to American choirs. So some consider them maybe a little unsubtle, or even, dare I say, unsophisticated, both in tone quality, diction, and in choice of repertoire. Well, again, so far as this disc is concerned, you may have no fear on that account. There is strength to be heard here, but also a ravishing purity at times from the Kansas City Contra performances that may possibly remind you of an Oxbridge choir.
Well, first thing to say is congratulations on your lovely review. That's very nice.
Well, I only liked it because that was the goal. Like that's what
exactly.
Like that's what we were trying to sound like.
Yeah.
But what do you think it means to say like the unsubtle thing? I'm not sure if I know what that means.
I think that's speaking to and frankly, it annoys me that I believe the Brits are quite snobbish about choir music.
Uh-huh.
I think there can be
Yeah.
I think enough people when we go around the world tell us that they love what we do. There's a danger that we get a little bit big-headed and
Right.
think we're great.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the things that frustrates me about the way the UK choirs operate sometimes, not always, but sometimes, is that there's a kind of acceptance that everyone can sight read, everyone's going to turn up and sing really well, and so it's going to be fine, and that's all we need to do. And then it's on the conductor to shape it as he or she wants. And for me, that's kind of the opposite ethos to my personal approach. I think we in VOCES8 we travel the world, so we get to see loads of good choirs, and for the Brits to think that they are ahead when we've just sat here and spent half an hour talking about the decline of our music education system, I think we need to be very careful that this doesn't come to get us in the next few years. Obviously we have a heritage of singing which we have to keep alive, but I also think we can learn a lot from all the other cultures and from so many different great choirs all around the world. And this review to me speaks a little bit of the over the last 50 years, that kind of snobbish view that the Brits have. I mean, we're very good, and obviously we sound very posh, so it's very easy to sound condescending as well. But yeah, we have great stuff going on. But I think to be open to other choirs singing great music and doing it in a unique way is a very important thing to place at the center of all of our learning. It's nice to sound like an Oxbridge choir, but you wouldn't want to sound like every Oxbridge choir. There are some
Right.
that are good.
Of course.
so,
Yeah.
so, you know,
Of course.
Oxbridge isn't always the answer, although it is doing very good things. You know, it's a
So
tricky
so
one.
here's how I think of it. I think you and I, because of our, even though we grew up in different worlds in a lot of ways, we ended up with probably a pretty similar preference of what we think a choir and a choral singer should sound like. I grew up with that kind of Anglophilic approach to choral music. But what I don't want listeners to think either, and it sounds like you and I agree on this based on what you just said, is that there are other correct ways to sing. Um, meaning it, because we like it better, we tend to gravitate towards that sound. But that does not mean that I think that a choir from, well, for another example would be a choir from South Africa.
Yeah.
Some of the choir schools down there just
Amazing.
make gorgeous,
Yeah.
unbelievable sounds. But I would even describe it as something different than American kids sing.
Totally.
And different than British. So it's I think a lot of it is informed by the way we speak our language. And that as long as the singing voice is being produced healthily in a way that is kind of natural to the speaking voice, then no harm is being done. And so there is room for a lot of different colors in the choral landscape.
Yeah.
And I imagine you come across a lot of those colors as you guys travel across the world and work with choirs from everywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we love. There is so much out there. And
Hmm.
at the beginning of every masterclass, I know often I'm in the room with a really good choir conductor, and there's a danger that we walk in as VOCES8 and we say, okay, this is how we do it, and the choir director and the kids think that is right. And actually, we say at the beginning of any session, what we're going to do is we're going to share our ideas, and that is how we have decided to approach what we do and how we do it. But that's not to say that there aren't 100 other ways of doing the same thing, and there is validity in so many different choices. It's an artistic discussion. Sometimes if you're playing a sport, someone wins, someone loses. You can say it was unfair or not, but actually, when it comes to a sports, there is a winner and a loser. When we're singing, that's not the case. We're working in the community in a different way, and we're connecting with each other in this marvelous soul enriching way. And we can make music and make color in there's so many possibilities. And
Hmm.
for us to come in and say, well, VOCES8 sings like this, so this is correct, for me that would be the total opposite of what we should be doing. Our job is to say, hey, if you work hard and if you make your own choices and you engage your creativity, and then you think about how to be the best technical group, and you put all of these little cogs together, this is the process that we go through. but the end result is our choice, and the end result of what you do should be your choice, because
Right.
there is a big world out there.
Yeah, and I would say that as if VOCES8 comes to work with a group of kids, they are going to hear that way of singing, and they're going to like it because of the overtone, the richness of the overtone series. Go back to the science thing a little bit, but
Yeah.
you can feel that in your body. Whereas
Yeah.
the slightly more disconnected way of singing will come across pretty well on a recording oftentimes,
Mm-hmm.
but in the room, you don't get that same visceral sense of the singers in front of you kind of moving the sound through your body. I know I sound like a hippie right now, but like you feel the vibration everywhere, and so they're going to get that natural inclination that, hey, something about what they're doing is righter than
Mm-hmm.
than what I'm doing. But that doesn't mean that would be the correct answer for all singing all the time. I
Right.
think any professional singer should be able to make their voice sound pretty much like what they want it to sound like in the moment.
Yeah.
Or it's kind of hard to call yourself a professional singer if you can only sing one way.
Quite.
And I think that's an important lesson that you might be helping kids see. They're going to make a noise with you guys in a workshop, and they're not going to sound like your basses,
Mm.
but they're going to do a really good job for what they're doing, and they'll
Yeah.
feel really good about it.
Yeah.
I know you're up against a hard out here to not miss a flight. So let's wrap up with some just things that you want us to know about on the way out. So anything you want to tell the audience, any tour
any, any
dates or
any useful things I can give you?
yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
That's very, very kind of you to give me the window.
Yeah.
So a couple of little things. First of all, I've mentioned in passing we have a US VOCES8 Scholars Program, which is designed for young professional singers, normally aged, I think this year they're aged 21 to 29. It's an opportunity that is auditioned, but people can apply for it from wherever they like in the US, and if they get the spot, it's fully funded. So we fly people in to work with us, we put them up, and we're trying to provide professional opportunities for people not just to learn how to sing, how to be recording artists, but also how to be educators. So if you have people listening to this who are interested, they can find more about that on our Facebook page and contact me if they want. We're off around the US for about 2.5 months every year, so I probably shouldn't start listing tour dates right now, but you can always find our information on voces8.com. I actually have, on a personal note, I have a new album out last month called Reflections, which it was all my own music. So I started composing when I stopped singing in the group. And I was very lucky that I got to have some singers called VOCES8 come and take part in the album. But Apollo 5 and our scholars have also taken part, along with 2,500 other singers. So it's been quite a big departure. And if anyone wants to check it out, they can find Reflections on Spotify. And in particular, there's a Nunc Dimittis of mine, which has just been published by Edition Peters. So that's another little plug. And last plug, we've got a new EP out next week with VOCES8. We're releasing a 15th anniversary set of 4 EPs, which will combine into a new album coming out next summer. But the first EP of After Silence is coming out digitally next week.
So tell me real quick, the 2,500 singers, are those like from different school choirs from around,
Yeah.
and you put like a recording together and mastered it together? How did that work?
Yeah, it was quite a challenge. I basically spent 3 months wherever I was in the world. So I was in America or France or Belgium or UK or Germany or out in Japan or anywhere. I would record these singers singing for a few minutes, and 3 different little pieces, and also singers and choirs could submit to me separately if they wanted to. And then I went and sat in a studio with Bill Hare over on the West Coast, who's like an a cappella legend producer out here, and we worked with him on an album we did of jazz a few years ago. And I sat with him, and we basically worked out how to stitch the whole thing together. So yeah, the hardest thing I think was making the CD booklet, because I had to get everyone's name in. so I have 2,500 names in the CD booklet.
Yeah.
It was incredible for me. It captured this idea that on the album there's like There's moments with a solo voice and a viola. There's moments that are mixing electronic and live. There's moments that are just pure a cappella, and there's moments that are kind of 2,000 people singing at the same moment. And that, I think, is what singing can do for us. It can unite us across all of these boundaries and borders, and that's what I love about our job. That in a world where it feels like we're putting up barriers, we can actually use music and use singing to try and break them down a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time and coming in and sharing these stories and thoughts with us. And if after you get off the plane to your next place, if you, I'll be in touch and grab some links to all that stuff.
Yeah, I'll send you some links and things for sure.
From you, yeah, and then I'll just put that in the show notes so audience members, whether watching on YouTube or listening on their podcast app, can just scroll down and find all that information, and we'll get that out there to people. Thank you so much, Paul, for being on the show.
Thanks for hosting me. It's been really, really nice to talk to you, and good luck with all you're doing. You're doing marvelous things.
All right, thank you, and safe flight.
Cheers. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of the episode. I hope you enjoyed that chat. I found that fascinating, and I, again, appreciate Paul's extra time that he put into putting this show on. And again, public thanks to Tony Maglione at William Jewell College for letting me invade his space and get some of that little clip done. And Tony, I'm sorry I missed your concert. Oh man, that's rough. Well, thank you again for sticking around. And if you enjoy this podcast and if you enjoy the topics that we cover, there are several things you can do to help me out. If you can like the podcast posts that you see on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that's hugely helpful because it fools the algorithm into thinking people all over the world just have to see this information. So that helps get it out there. Other things you can do is, if you have not yet rated the podcast on the app that you use, that's very helpful. A good rating is awesome, but be honest and give it some kind of rating. And in any kind of comment you leave in the podcast app, also, these are things that trick the algorithms into pushing the podcast up higher so people can find it easier. Those are things that are very helpful. And of course, sharing an episode directly from my website is also a very helpful thing. So those are all things that you could do me a solid and help me spread the word about the show, because I'm working hard over here trying to track down these folks to talk to you, and it'd be great to get any help that you can give me in spreading the word. And of course, if you want to support the show directly and be a member of the innermost circles, there are two. It's like a cult, only without a religious leader, because I'm not into that whole thing. I'm not going to make you drink any Kool-Aid or anything. But there are some circles. There is the Choralosophers Facebook group, which is free to join. Anyone who listens to the show is encouraged to go on Facebook, search the Choralosophers group. It's a closed group where you can listen to the show and then go to the group and see if any conversation about the show is happening. And if you don't see any conversation, then start some. It's designed to be a context-rich space devoted to the show topics that we talk about here. And then the innermost circle is the Patreon. That is the elite of the elite Choralosophy listeners. You can, for as little as $3 a month, go on the patreon.com/Choralosophy and subscribe. And when you become a paid subscriber, even for as little as $3 a month, you're going to get a patron-only episode once a month. And that's some super behind-the-scenes stuff and maybe some topics that I don't feel like need to be on the main show, but I just kind of put my thoughts out there for you once a month, in addition to any special background materials and or documents in any of my nuts and bolts episodes that will go on there for patrons to be able to pull their own copies off of and work with in their classrooms. So check all that stuff out. Those are all great options of ways to become a choralosopher and to spread the word. Thank you so much for your time and for listening, and we'll see you next time. I'm going to play you out on this episode with a little bit more of Paul's Nunc Dimittis.